All right, well, I will start out now, and I want to thank y'all all for coming out on Saturday. I know it's hard to get up. It was hard for me. I got up really early to come from Charlotte, so I appreciate everybody coming out. And this is really exciting to do this with Thomas. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I've been away. So what I'm going to do, I'm trying not to talk so much because I like to get talk from you all. I'd like to hear from you all. I think this is important, particularly now and where we are in the state of our country to talk to each other. It's just we don't do enough talking face to face, and I'm as guilty as anybody of going on Facebook and making some outrageous comment, my opinion, and not listening as much because it's hard to listen on Facebook because there's nobody to listen to. It's just words. So I'd love to do that here. Let's listen to each other, talk to each other. So I'm just going to start out by saying, talking a little bit about Dixie Lullaby, why I wrote it, and what's happened in the years since it came out. 13 years ago. It's hard for me to believe that. I had just, when I wrote the book, I had just gone through runs working at MTV and Rolling Stone, and I was in a recovery program, 12-step recovery program, and trying to kind of figure out who I was and why I was. I was in New York. I hadn't been in the South in many years, and I was just trying to figure out who this person is who's just suddenly coming out of this fog, and don't know where I am and why I am. And so I had written a couple of articles, one for the New York Times and one for a book called Rolling Stone in the 70s, about Southern music and Southern culture and its importance, politically and socially and all that stuff. And I had a personal relationship with this music, but it had been a long time since I'd been here. And I was talking with a friend of mine at the time, and she said, this is a book. Why don't you write a book? And I had been working with an agent about maybe doing a book while I was at Rolling Stone, but I didn't have the time. And there were two books that I had in mind. One was one of those tell-alls about your substance abuse and the rock and roll lifestyle and all that stuff, which would have sold well. It would have sold really well. But I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to glorify it, and it just wasn't the place that I really needed to be at that time. So I decided to do Dixie Lullaby. And while I was writing Dixie Lullaby, I felt like I needed to come back down south because I didn't really know the South like I had. It's been a long time. I had intellectual ideas of what the South was like, but I had to come back here to kind of get a real sense of what it was like when I was growing up. So I wrote Dixie Lullaby, and in the years, I never would have dreamed when it came out that 13 years later, our country would be where it is right now. I never would have dreamed. I thought, being the naive person I am, that we'd all come together and live in peace and harmony forever. I don't know why. I've always been kind of naive. But in the years since it came out, an African-American was elected president, and I was like bowled over. It was the biggest rush I'd ever had in my life. I campaigned for him in 2008. And watching this person that I campaigned for become president was just so exciting. And here we are now, and no matter what side of the political divide you're on, and divide is the operative word, we're divided. And since then, social media has become a big part. Social media didn't exist when Dixie Lullaby, but we should have because we could have better marketed it. But it hadn't, and social media has become such a big part of the dialogue now, and we don't do this enough, and we don't read books enough, and we don't talk to each other enough. And that's what we hope to do today is to keep talking. So that's where I was when I wrote my book, and that's what's happened in a nutshell since, from my perspective. And what I'm going to do now is just read a little bit of a section of it. I'm not going to read much. Thomas and I talked about talking a little bit, reading a little bit, and then just opening up and having you all talk. So, read a little. It's from the 6th chapter. It's called Jive Talking, and it goes a little like this. On a balmy weeknight in the spring of 1975, a night warm enough for a t-shirt and cut-off jeans, but not yet so hot that folks were complaining about it, I met up with Hubert Miller and Martin Nicholson next to a streetlight at the corner of Coleridge Road and East Salisbury Street in our hometown. The intersection served as the proverbial tracks in Asheboro. My family lived on the south side of Salisbury, the white side. Martin and Hubert's families lived on the north side, known as the Hill, or Colored Town. It was late, around midnight, and the three of us were not just a little freaked out. At school, there was a riot going on. During lunch break earlier in the week, a white girl had been tackled on the playground by a black guy. When a group of white boys saw what happened, they pounced on the black kid and beat him with all the stored-up rage of several generations of white fear. The scuffle escalated into a school-wide war. Although the black boy and white girl both were adamant that the tackle had only been horseplay, it was too late. As in Los Angeles in the wake of the O.J. Simpson trial many years later, the battle lines were drawn at Asheboro Junior High School. For the next week, the school grounds became a combat zone. Whites and blacks released all the suppressed frustration that had been stirred up during the Civil Rights Movement and left smoldering in the 6 years since the schools in my hometown had been completely integrated. The police were called in to mediate, and a few students were suspended or expelled for the rest of the term. The kids who didn't want to be involved stayed home. Martin, Hubert, and I skipped classes that week to avoid taking sides. With nothing else to do, we roamed the streets of East Asheboro, throwing rocks up into the wiring of the streetlights to cause brief blackouts in the neighborhood. On this particular night, we eventually made our way to the home of Martin's Aunt Peaches. I brought along a copy of Keep On Smiling by the southern rock band Wet Willie. I wanted Martin and Hubert to hear the record because one of the songs on it, Soul Sister, was as funky as anything I'd ever heard by a black soul group. The song featured the vocals of the Williettes, two female backup singers whose voices resembled the sassy gospel harmonies of the Sweet Inspirations. Man, them dudes sound black. I think I like it, said Hubert, whom we called Tater for his round, potato-like body. Glad Tater here. He was supposed to be here, too. Martin nodded in agreement. They had an album for me, too. Get that Funkadelic record, Tater said to Martin, and the two grinned at each other as if they were about to open up Pandora's box. I heard the name Funkadelic, but was more familiar with leader George Clinton's other band, Parliament, whose album covers featured men and women in space-age outfits. Some of the black kids would bring Parliament's records to school and sing along to songs like Up for the Downstroke. Funkadelic's different, said Tater, pulling the record out of its sleeve. It had a disturbing cover image of a woman with a huge afro buried to her neck in maggots. When Hubert put the needle to the grooves of the album, 1971's Maggot Brain, the music was as bizarre as anything I'd ever heard by Pink Floyd or Frank Zappa. The wailing of lead guitar on the 10-minute title track made the noodling of the Grateful Dead's Jerry Garcia seem like quaint folk music by comparison. Things were going on in this funky psychedelic mix that I had never thought could occupy the same sonic space. Heavy, fuzzy, hard rock power chords, deep, funky bass, doo-wop and gospel vocals, gentle acoustic folk guitar strumming. My bias had led me to assume that black musicians made only straightforward soul, funk, or rhythm and blues. I couldn't imagine that they had the creative wherewithal to come up with such otherworldly sounds. This is me at 15. At 15, I was slowly becoming aware of the limitations of my experience. In hindsight, having later discovered John Coltrane and Miles Davis and traced the music of the Allman Brothers Band back to its African-American blues and free jazz origins, my surprise upon hearing Funkadelic's music that night is laughable. I'd heard the voices of the singers in the black churches of my hometown and listened to the wisdom of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches on television. But though I instinctively knew blacks could do more than sweep floors or take care of white babies, I'd never been taught this much. Neither Martin nor Tater had learned until that night that Southern whites could sing funky soul music the way Jimmy Hall of Wet Willie did. A quarter-century later, when I was an editorial executive at MTV, Martin came to visit me in New York. as we reminisced about our school days, he asked me to play those Funkadelic and Wet Willie albums again. When Soul Sister came on, Martin looked at me and smiled. Back then, man, I had no clue you people could sing like that, he said. On that spring night in 1975, it took a race riot to bring Martin Nicholson, Tater Miller, and me closer to each other's cultures.
Okay. My book really started out, I was writing an article. I had been talking to a cousin of mine in Robbins, and I was telling her this story about this guy I met in 1989. And I had 2 long conversations with the guy, and had been in an all-day training with that guy. This was in 1989. This conversation was in 2008. And the end of that story is that guy wound up being president of the United States. And my cousin told me I should write that story down. So I wrote that story down, and for some reason that was an inspiration to write other little stories. So I just started writing little stories. So in my mind, I was not writing a book. But as I started to collect the stories, at some point, wait a minute, I got a book here. And so I arranged everything, and it was crazy that it all worked out. Theme-wise, everything. It pretty much laid out chronologically. I had to add some stories to it, but that was, for writers, writing is the easy part. The social media and promotion and all that, we want to write. We don't want to get caught up in all that. So writing the book was the easy part. So that's how my book came together. I started writing stories in 2008 and eventually published it in 2012. And to get started today, I said, well, how do I want to begin this? I felt like there was one thing I needed to do, and it would kill a couple of birds with one stone. I wanted to start with music, in part to respect Mark and him writing with music kind of as a theme in what he does. And I don't want to say what the other part of that is until I play this song. And this song is by my favorite artist. He's not super well known. He's known, but he's not super well known. But he's been my favorite artist for a long time. It's a guy named People Bryce. And like I said, I want to play the song first, and then I'll explain to you why. Now, supposedly, that's a love song made in the context of a romantic relationship. But what I wanted to do when I wrote my book was put a whole new spin on it. That song says about, as well as I can say, how I feel about my parents. So that's why I wanted to start with that song. And in writing my book, this is what I say at the end of the acknowledgments. If I had to define a single goal of this work, the one specific thing that I want to accomplish, it would be for readers to walk away with at least an inkling of their meaning within my life. I was blessed to have been in the presence of their greatness, a fact that I want to shine through on every page. This book is dedicated to them for all that they bestowed upon me, because I get it, and understanding the monumental gift from God when He made them my parents. And this is Mr. Pearl Rush and Miss Hortense Crisco Rush, my parents, on the front of the book. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to put on the cover, with the type of book that I wrote, I said, what best expresses who I am? What image could I put out to the world? And I just happened to be looking through my pictures at home, and this is the picture that I came up with. And it's a picture that was taken of my parents on their wedding day. That's my mother's writing. It says the day we were married, and then it has the date, August 4th, 1946. Part of that is part of another story, which I think is crazy, because I talk about connections a lot. And I met President Obama in 1989. And that date, August 4th, 1946, 15 years later, on August 4th, 1961, on my parents' 15th wedding anniversary, Barack Obama was born. So there's one connection.
America.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to read a short piece from another story called Be Careful with Assumptions. And it's crazy that Addie's here today because this kind of relates to this. I mean, she'll understand. Central Elementary School was located about a half mile from my home, and I began kindergarten there in August of 1967. I attended Central for 2 years when in August of 1969, I, along with others in our community, was forced out to attend one of the 5 newly integrated elementary schools in Asheboro. All black Central Elementary schools permanently shut down due to the fact that a high-ranking school official was reported to have stated that white parents would not feel safe with their children attending a school in the black community. Therefore, the black children in my community were divided up and sent to the various white elementary schools. The decision meant that all 5 of the prevailing elementary schools were now located in the predominantly white communities, while the lone school within our territory had been removed. I don't think the school officials who were responsible for the decision ever bothered or cared to ask the question, will black parents feel safe sending their children to predominantly white schools? At the time, there were 6 elementary schools in town: Central, Lindley Park, McCrary, Donnelly Laughlin, Gabi-Chichi, and Balfour. 5 of those schools were predominantly white, and there was only one predominantly black school who had an awful lot of history and legacy attached to it. So, for those of us who are African-American in this town, to watch the only school that we had shut down and us dispersed amongst those 5 schools, it's so unfair to me that it's crazy. What would have made sense was to shut one of the white schools down and keep the only black school we had and integrate all of them. But that's not what was done. And when I talk to my peers, when I'm in my community and we talk about things like this, this is the kind of cultural, what I call cultural greed, where when something that affects the whole community is only done in an interest of usually the white community. So like I said, Central was closed forever. So that was killed. At least that, I mean, I don't want to say it was killed, right, Eddie? It wasn't killed, but at least the academic part of it as a school was just stopped. And then, like I said, I was talking about connections and how a lot of those things, it just amazes me sometimes when God will take certain incidences and phenomena and bring it into your life. And you think that that's a separate and distinct occurrence. And then something else happens later and you say, wow, that's crazy that happened. And I want to start with the first paragraph of Mark's book. in the book proper. On a brisk fall morning, the first day of the 1968 school year, some 200 students of Lindley Park, one of 5 elementary schools in the small mill town of Asheboro, North Carolina, filed into the auditorium for what would be a historic announcement. From that day forward, the classes would be racially integrated. It had been a long time coming. In the previous 4 years, in accordance with Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, several other schools in this predominantly white, middle-class town nestled into the rolling hills halfway between the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Outer Banks had begun the process of desegregation. For the first time in history, black children were sitting alongside white children in classrooms all across the town and region, studying from the same books, learning from the same teachers, taking recess on the same playgrounds, eating from the same plates and utensils, sharing the same restrooms. So why do I find that amazing? What's amazing about that is Mark is 2 years older than I am. I was one of those black children that would be coming that he's describing. And this was, 32, 49 years ago. Nobody could have told him and I that we would be sitting at this table even having this conversation. So, yeah.
So when we met, it was such a powerful day.
That's all I'm going to say about it.
This is an amazing day, and I've been looking forward to it for a long time because we met online, and that's exactly why we're doing this. That's why we're calling it Perspectives. We both had different perspectives of growing up here. We come from a similar place philosophically, and so that's what we wanted to do here. And now it's you guys.
I just wanted to ask a question. Could you repeat the date of that announcement? I missed it.
I don't know.
It might not have been exactly.
Well, I'm not going to let me explain from my perspective, and then I'll let him explain.
Right.
Okay, because I attended Lindley Park until 3rd grade, and I'm trying to place in my mind, can I remember being there, you know, at that announcement is what I was trying to.
Yeah, I remember being there. It's I was in either the 2nd or 3rd grade. It was 1968, as far as I remember. You remember 1969?
Right. Yeah, because what I remember, I started at Central. Mm-hmm. My kindergarten year was 67, 68. I had Miss Sala in the 1st grade, so that would have been 68, 69. So my first year at Lindley Park was Miss Craven in the 2nd grade, which would have been 69, 70.
Well, that was my first year at Lindley Park, was 1969.
Might have been 1960. I don't know. It could have been 1960.
So I don't know.
I was doing
trying to piece.
I came
fill
up
in the gap here.
1968, but I could have been wrong.
Okay.
Easy. Yeah. Maybe someone else is a historian.
Well, I mean, it was technically integrated 64, 65.
Well, technically. Yes.
Technically. And then the 7th and the 8th and the 9th, I mean, those were integrated in 65, I think.
Which ones?
The junior high.
The junior high
and the high school. Yeah.
Would that have been Federal Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, Federal Street was going for a few more years with just 7th graders.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this is all in the school board record, but any of us care enough to look it up.
Well, the year that Lindley Park. I came here when I was doing the research. I don't know where I got 68. I have notes in the back but yeah.
Well, it sounds right to me.
It's in the general ballpark, and the point is that this thing happened.
Yeah.
These kids were brought together, and us kids were brought.
What happened when they closed your black school? Now, by the way, I'm a Yankee, so I wasn't here. What happened to the teachers? Were they integrated also?
If you read the newspapers of the time, what I feel like, I mean, this is just me, and I'm reading currently. I mean, because people have been sending me articles from back then. If you read the newspapers of the time, it's almost like an undercurrent of viciousness at the teachers. Almost like we want to punish you because we're integrated. So those teachers had to scramble to find jobs. Their contracts were ended. But if you listen to the language, and it's real subtle, but I hear it when I should hear it with my voice when I'm reading it. It's almost like, okay, we got to integrate. Now let's see what we can do to punish you for that.
Well, there's a court case that went to the 4th Circuit Court. It's a pretty major court case.
Here in North Carolina.
And it went to Richmond almost immediately. Because the issue was that Central was all the African-American kids from Ramsey or Random. By the way, I could be wrong about this. Anybody feel free, but this is my understanding of it. And that Central was the central school because it's where you went if you were, because of my grandmother's generation, there weren't really high schools. My mother, there were a few high schools, but it was not unusual for black and white kids to go to cities to finish their high school. But this was beyond that, and so Central served as a way of cutting costs, because it was black kids who had to bus in or drive in to get a high school education. Does that fit with what you understand, Tom?
Yeah, it does.
And so, and this court case is pretty ugly to read. It involved teachers that I knew and I had.
Because one of the things that was being said in the articles, which I thought was condescending and insulting, was the implication that the black teachers weren't qualified enough to teach in quote-unquote white schools. And I know of a personal situation, I'm not going to call names, where a person had a position at Central, and in order to get a job within the integrated school system, had to do something else and had to go back to school at one of the quote-unquote white colleges in the area. And when that person went to go, the question they were asked, you think you can go there and pass? And then when that person went there and an official went to check on their grades later, that person was told by one of the secretaries that that official turned beet red because that person had straight A's.
It still happens. I read recently a friend of mine on Facebook talking about she was graduate school maybe or something, going into some curriculum that she was questioned. But like, what do you really think you can do?
Well, I would. I would. Right. I mean, in part, and I should have a question. When I was getting ready to go to college, I should say, consciously, I did mediocre through high school. C plus, B minus. I did okay. Partly because my parents didn't really know anything about college aid. And they felt like their finances were in place for me to go to college. So it's almost like I rationalized doing mediocre to make it so I couldn't go. But at the same time, I was schizophrenic because I took all the classes that I would need if I ever wanted to go. So when I get, I'm in Germany, and my roommate, I'm in the Army, stationed in Germany, and my roommate's reading this book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. And when I read it, it was like a torch had been lit. Because, I'll just give you one example. Because I was reading this in the book, and when I got there, I just pushed the book to the side. I said, I can't believe somebody did that. I said, that's crazy to me. Yes, he was in prison when he did it, but he copied the entire dictionary into notebooks to improve his vocabulary. I said, anybody that's that committed to learning, I can certainly go to college. I don't know what I'm going to have to do, but I'm going to figure it out. And it was because of his encouragement to do it. And so that's when I go back to Asheboro High School. I've had this mediocre pass in high school, but there was one teacher who had been Teacher of the Year in the state 2 or 3 times, Dr. Penny Smith. Mm-hmm. I was in the 10th grade. I had her for English. And I can't even remember what the context was. And it was like, she didn't say it like she was announcing off of some summit or anything. She just said it as a nonchalant statement. And everybody knows me as Tommy in Asheboro instead of the Thomas, but I prefer Thomas. But she told me, she said, Tommy, she said, you can go to college if you want to. You just have to make up your mind that you want to. So when I came back to Asheboro, after being in the Army, I already had my mind made up that I wanted to go to school. I felt like I wanted to choose a small Ivy League type school because I felt like I had something to prove to myself. I didn't care about anybody. It was something I had to prove to myself. I didn't want to go to Yale, Harvard, any place like that. I wanted a small Ivy League school. So I did my research, and I came up with a Quaker school in Pennsylvania called Haverford, which has a very stellar reputation. And that was the school I wanted to go to. So I came and talked to whoever the guidance counselor was at that time. She takes out my file. She's looking through this file, and she looks at me and she said, well, and I'm paraphrasing, you're not really Haverford material. You should try to go to one of the local schools. And to this day, I'm surprised at my restraint. Because I knew I was going to Haverford. It didn't matter what she said, because why was I going to have her? Because I'm Pearl and Hortense's child. That's why I'm going to have her. So I said, wait a minute, what can I do? So I wrote Dr. Smith a letter. And she called me. She's real enthusiastic. Yes, you can. I mean, almost like she was cheering on the phone. Yes, you can go. Yes, you can go. And she wanted to meet with me. And I met with her, and I was talking to her about the classes that I had in high school. And she asked me who were the other teachers that I thought should recommend me. And I told her, and I called her Penny. I said, Penny, I said, it's crazy. I didn't do well on the classes that didn't mean anything. But the college level courses, I did real well at. I said I had Miss Atkins for Spanish. I had 3 years of Spanish in high school. I had, I think her name is Miss Burge or Miss Burgess. I can't remember which one. Yeah. Both of them were enthusiastic. So with my college application, with me doing well on the SAT, and Penny also told me I had some other variables going for me in getting into Haverford. One, Haverford is a really snotty, elite kind of school. I mean, a lot of people there have money. It was rare for Southerners to go there. That was one thing to my advantage. I was 22 years old coming in as a freshman. I wasn't some spoiled teenager. So with all those things, I got accepted. And 4 years later, I went back to Penny with something in my hand. I said, Penny, we need to copy it. So copy it for what? We're going to copy it and send it to that guidance counselor. And it was my
Yes, we can. You know, it's so interesting. You know, you mentioned Penny. Penny Smith was so instrumental in my life too. You know, we didn't know each other, but we both kind of. Ms. Jones, I think, was one of the teachers that came over from Central. Ms. Isbell, I think, was another teacher.
Well, she was Miss Simpson.
Miss Simpson. Yeah, she was Miss Simpson that came over, but God, how many teachers didn't? You know, it was that somebody brought that up. Where did those teachers go? And I only remember the teachers that came over. I don't remember those who didn't know what happened. I would like to know.
And I don't know where Miss Siler went, but every one of my family members had Miss Siler. And one of the things that I've always said that I've been proud of, for my own reasons, having gone to a segregated school, I've always been proud that Miss Siler at Central Elementary School is the one who taught me how to read. And if that had not happened, I would not be sitting here talking to you today.
Anybody else? Yes. You both addressed this a little bit, both in your book and your speaking. Could you talk a little bit about your travels and your Southern identity, particularly in the context of like the recent election? It seems to be a big fact. I write a lot on the Confederate flag, and it seems to be a big factor in what we see happening in the election. And Southern identity is often maligned. Could you talk a little bit about that?
But I think Southern identity, quote unquote, is not homogenous.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm coming from a different place.
Yeah.
I just ain't. You know, and one of the things I thought about talking about today was when I was in the 5th grade, I had Miss Pritchard. And we used to have a music teacher, Miss Thomas. That used to come. I don't remember how often she came. Once every week, every 2 weeks, whatever. And part of what she would do was have us sing different songs from history, from regional history, whatever. And there were 3 black children in that class. Me, my cousin, Atchis Harrison, his nickname is Bootsy, and Archie Cole. And Miss Thomas comes one week, and she's going to start this song. And she's singing this song, and she's like a maestro up there in front of everybody. And she's looking to make sure there's full participation. And I'm sitting there like this, mouth shut. And she stops the class, and she, why are you not singing? You better sing this song. I said, I'm not singing that song. And they start again, and I'm still not singing. And then she stops again to tell me I better sing or I'm going to be in trouble. And Bootsy and Archie came up to me and asked me why I'm not singing. So when she started to begin again, she got another problem. All 3 of the black children that I sing. And she stops it again. She tells me when Miss Pritchard gets back, because Miss Pritchard would leave during that break, and she had a combination class, a 5th and a 6th grade class. I don't know if she took the 6th graders somewhere or where she was, but she wasn't there. So when she came back, Miss Thomas tells her what happens. Miss Pritchard gets the class started on some work, and she said, I need to talk to you in the hall. Let me see if I can find what I told her.
I'm assuming this wasn't Lift Every Voice.
No, it wasn't.
Just wanted to clarify.
Miss Pritchard closed the door, glaring at me with red-faced anger. Her voice and question were self-righteous. Why weren't you singing? In a patient and calm voice, I said, that song was the theme of the Confederacy. The Confederacy was fighting to maintain slavery, meaning they were fighting to keep my people, black people, in slavery. Therefore, I am not singing that song. It immediately became obvious that my answer did not meet with Miss Pritchard's expectation. She seemed to experience a brief second of confusion, embarrassment, and upset. Her anger vanished, and her head dropped like a child who had been caught in the wrong. Her voice lowered with empathy as she said, from now on, when Miss Thomas comes and she sings that song, you don't have to sing it.
That was Miss Pritchard in a nutshell.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons she's on my log. It's one of my favorite teachers because that wasn't normal.
Yeah.
She had an open, but it was that it consciously registered to me that the student can become the teacher.
Yeah.
She had not looked at it ever probably from that angle, but she learned something that, and she was open to learning something that day.
That's so important. That being open to learning something, and that to me, and to bring things into the present right now, that to me is what's so important about us getting together here today, and about people getting together physically instead of just online, is that so that we can learn stuff. If we can't learn stuff from each other's perspectives, and that's what this is called, then we're doomed